In this video, we're going to have a look at how we can upsert our vectors into a Pinecone index. So we start by, first, if you haven't already, you need to pip install the Pinecone client. And then you can import Pinecone and initialize your connection to Pinecone using your API key, which you will need to put here. And you can find your API key over here. Once that's done, we will need to create an index to upsert our vectors to, and we can do that using the createIndex method. We're going to be creating vectors with dimensionality of 128, so I've included that in there. Now, I'm going to create some random vectors using the random module. So I'm going to write random.random. And I'm just going to create 128 random values for each vector. Okay, so we now have 5 IDs and we will have 5 vectors to go with them. So I need to add that in here. Okay. Now, to upsert our vectors, we first need to actually connect to an index. So to do that, we're going to connect to our example index up here. And all we do is write index equals pinecone.index, and we specify name of our index here. And once we've done that, all we do is index.upsert. We use the vectors parameter, and all we need to do is pass both our IDs and our vectors. And we can see that we've just upserted 5 vectors there. So that's the simplest way of upserting, but of course, most of the time you're not only going to be upserting 5 vectors, you're going to want to be upserting more. So what you can do is batch your upserts over several requests. So what we're going to do here, we're going to create 10,000 vectors. And what we have here is an example generator that will generate those IDs and vector pairs. So you can see in here, we just have the same code that we use up here to create a vector. So that will create our IDs and vectors. And what we're going to do is use this chunks function. And what that will do is chunk our generated vectors into batches of 100, set by this batch size variable. So we can run that. And all we do is go through that. So for chunk in chunks, and we want to pass our example data generator into there. We are just going to write index.upsert. We have our vectors, and we are just passing in that chunk. Exactly the same as what we did up here. So we'll run that. And that took us 10 seconds to upsert using our chunks. Now, what we can do is, if you have a lot of data that you want to upsert, you can actually do your upserts in parallel. So using the Pinecone client, we can use asynchronous upserts. So all we do is we have our Pinecone index again. We specify the number of threads we will use, and we're specifying that as index, just like we did up here. Okay, but this time we modify the function a little bit to allow asynchronous upserts. We then send those requests in parallel. So all we're doing here is we have our async results, and here we just do our upsert, making sure that we add async required equals true. And we do that for each chunk. So before we had chunk like this in our chunks, and we can remove the batch size, that's the default. And that will do what we did before, but it will do everything asynchronously. So then we can run that and we're done straight away. So it's much faster. So that's how you would insert data or upsert data into your Pinecone index.